Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and it's a pleasure to be with you, providing honestly provocative talk radio for America. And you're invited to the conversation. I want to get this off my chest. I know I talked a lot about Hunter Biden and about the plea deal yesterday, but I just got to unload this. That judge's decision to trash the sweetheart plea deal on tax and gun crimes. And by the way, my friends, my fellow former colleagues in the news business. I mean, I'm in the opinion business now, but I still consider myself an opinion journalist. But this is a place where they're being highly dishonest. They tell stories and they say tax violations. No, what Hunter Biden did is a tax crime. Is it that hard for reporters to say it's a crime? And the gun violation that they keep talking about is a crime. It's false swearing. It's signing a piece of paper promising that the information you put on that piece of paper is accurate when Hunter Biden knew it was not accurate. That is a criminal offense in the United States, and signing that paper is the written version of perjury. He should have gone to federal prison for it. Well, the plea deal fell apart, and it means trouble for Hunter Biden, but that's not the big deal. The big trouble is for the big guy, Joe Biden. Hunter failed to file and pay his taxes on almost $10 million in income that he earned on his dad's name. That is the biggest of the crimes. Not the part Hunter did, the part that Joe Biden did. And the reason I mentioned that $10 million, his guilty plea, if it had been allowed, and it was not, was going to involve $1.5 million that he failed to declare. In case the people who do your taxes have not told you this already, I was told this when I was 18 years old. Lars, whatever you do when you file your taxes, declare all your income. Failure to declare income is a crime, and people go to prison for it. And I've had folks say, nah, they don't actually go to prison. Ask Wesley Snipes whether or not you go to prison for failing to declare income. And then he bought a gun illegally. He committed a crime. He expected to walk into that Delaware courtroom about 36 hours ago and just get a slap on the wrist, because that's what's happened to Hunter Biden most of his life. He gets a sweetheart deal to join the Naval Reserve, and then he blows it on the very first day with a dirty UA. You know, he urinated in a cup, and they said, you got cocaine in you. Then he tried to blame two black guys that he had cocaine because he had bummed a cigarette from them at a bar. Instead, yesterday, a federal judge said she was not going to rubber stamp any such deal. That forced the infamous addict and influence peddling son of a Joe to enter a not guilty plea to the criminal charges. He faces a trial and potential prison. Is the trial likely to happen? Probably not. Is he likely to go to prison? Probably not. And it's worse for Joe. And I will say this. A lot of you have been emailing saying, Lars, can't Joe Biden as president of the United States just pardon his son? Well, the legal answer is yes, he can. Politically, it would be political suicide for him to do it. And already the White House has been asked that question. Will President Biden pardon, Hunter Biden if Hunter Biden is convicted? The White House has already said he will not pardon his son. Now, Joe could change his mind. There isn't much mind left to change, but there it is. But it's worse for Joe because next week, one of Hunter Biden's former business partners has promised to testify under oath to Congress that puts a lie to everything Joe Biden has been telling Americans for the last 3 years. That he never talked business with Hunter. He did. That he never met with Hunter's business partners. He did. Joe Biden claims he had nothing to do with the favors that his son promised to corrupt figures, both in office and out of office, in Ukraine and communist China. And one of my favorite parts, the judge set the conditions of release for the accused criminal son of a president. No booze, no drugs, no guns, regular urine tests, and find a job. And I'll tell you this, I seriously doubt that Hunter Biden's scam of selling his lousy paintings to generous Democrats who want to curry favor with the old man actually meets Judge Norika's definition of employment. To your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Let's go to Mike. Hey, Mike, welcome to the program on a Thursday. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to show me the law that says that we have to pay taxes.
Are we going to
I want
debate
you to bring.
taxes? I thought you called in about Hunter Biden, but is there a law? Yeah, Congress has passed laws saying we pay taxes. Now, they call it a voluntary system, but if you don't voluntarily pay your taxes, eventually men and women with guns show up and take your stuff.
Well, that's not true. I wrote a letter to the IRS saying that I do not wish to pay taxes and have nothing done to me, and they wrote me back saying, "Thank you very much. Let us know what we can do for you in the future." And I have not been touched once in 3 years.
Have you? And you failed to declare income,
Correct.
and you think you will not go? You will not be prosecuted for that? Okay. Good
Nope.
luck. I mean, here's the thing, Mike. I've heard for better than 25 years, I've heard people advance the theory that taxes are unconstitutional. They could be. Prove it in court, and you've got a case. I've heard them say that you're not required to pay taxes. Okay. Operate under that. I operate under the belief that if I don't pay my taxes, and I do, if I don't declare all my income, and I do, that at some point the IRS will show up and they'll say, we're going to take your stuff. We'll put a lien on your bank account. We'll put a lien on your property or your car. If you want to go that route, go ahead. But Mike, can you point to me one court case where somebody walked into court and said, the IRS says I have to pay, I say I don't, and they won that case?
I don't got one for you right now, Lars. I just know that 3 years I haven't had a problem with the IRS.
Well, I wish you well. I don't want to see you be like Matt Taibbi, who had the IRS agent show up at and by the way, you think Wesley Snipes, the Hollywood actor, do you think he had good lawyers?
Well, I just think that America's not smart about the laws.
Answer my question first. Do you think Wesley Snipes, the Hollywood actor, had good lawyers?
The lawyers have worked for the court, so I don't know.
Okay. Oh, you don't know if he, I mean, would you guess that a guy who makes millions of dollars in movies, has made millions of dollars in movies, and failed to declare the income, so he just went to prison for no reason, even though his lawyers said, well, we could have gone to court and showed that you didn't even have to declare your income or pay your taxes, but we're going to let you go to prison anyway? That's how it worked?
I don't know, Lars. I can't tell you.
Okay. Well, it sounded like you'd studied the subject very well and then not. By the way, I also mentioned that Carl's Jr. is now selling its Diablo Devil Burger for $6.66. And I posed the question, what do you think Carl's Jr. is trying to communicate to its customers and the general public? Rob's on the line. Hey, Rob, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What do you wanted to call in about that?
Yeah, you opened your show with that, and I didn't hear anything else about it.
That's all I know about it is they're selling a burger called the Diablo, meaning the devil burger, and they're selling it for $6.66.
Yeah, the first time I saw the commercial on TV, and they went with the $6.66.
Yeah, now tell me this: what are they trying to tell their customers?
I am not sure.
Okay, well, I appreciate the phone call. Thank you very much. 866, hey, Lars. That's 866-439-5277. Coming up, today the U.S. House held a hearing on the dangers of due process violations of gender-affirming care. We're going to get into that coming up next on the Lars Larson Show and Conspiracy Theory Thursday. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always great to take your calls, but I want to talk to Sarah Parshall-Perry about this. Sarah, there's a phenomena that I watch. I watch the Congress from as far away as I can get and stay inside the continental United States. I think it's safer here. I mean, if I could go to Hawaii, it might be even better, but I do it from the left coast of America. And one of the things I've noticed is if there's a bill that's full of really offensive, trashy garbage, they'll put the most warm and fuzzy name on it they possibly can. And if they're going to have a hearing, they're going to have a hearing on something that is pretty simple to understand. They put the most bureaucratic, complicated name on it: dangers of due process violations of gender-affirming care. And I thought, why don't we just call it what it is? Mutilating kids violates their civil rights. But I guess that would be me. I probably wouldn't keep my job as a staffer for anybody in the House or the Senate. Welcome back to the program, by the way.
I'm super glad to be back, Lars. Love doing your show. Listen, the Constitution and gender, quote, affirming care don't mix. And that was something that sort of ran as an undercurrent during the entirety of the hearing today. And I got to tell you, I heard a lot of repetitive dialogue from the left, from the Democratic representatives about right-wing rhetoric and sort of Christian fundamentalism and how this is ideologically driven, when in fact, gender mutilation, cutting up the bodies of healthy 12, 15, 17-year-olds just to affirm, quote unquote, their gender dysphoria, which, by the way, is a mental health condition, should not be ideologically driven. It is common sense. It is constitutional to make sure that the parents cannot achieve this dangerous healthcare intervention, and it's fully within the state's rights to do so. But boy, you would not know that listening to the Democratic members of the House Judiciary.
I guess one of the things I hope for is that every once in a while, the left's policies go so far off the edge of the planet that they come around and bite them in the backside. I know I've mixed up metaphors there, but I guess I'd make this comparison. I never thought my parents were abusing me if they spanked me. But beating kids is wrong. Nobody disagrees about that. So you say, but there are parents who think that, the good application of a willow switch to somebody's backside, even if it leaves a mark, even if it maybe even draws blood, that'll raise up a good kid. And you say, well, that's a crazy attitude. And I say, okay, how about castrating young boys or doing double mastectomies on teenage girls? Is that worse or better or just as bad? And they'll say, oh, no, that's gender affirming. And I say, hold on, you are against, abusing children when it came to even spanking them too hard. But now if you cut off your 13-year-old daughter's breasts, that's actually good for her?
Right. And you know what? You rightly brought up sort of a state law analog here. Every state in the country, including all of the U.S. territories, has child welfare laws on the books that divest custodial parents and guardians of their children if they have reason to believe that there is physical or, in some cases, emotional or coercive mental abuse taking place for these children. This is no less severe than what we're seeing in this sort of gender juggernaut right now, and the science is decidedly unsettled. One of the experts that was called by the Democrats was a individual who identifies as being a man, even though this individual is biologically a woman. It's a person who actually works for the National Lesbian Rights Action League, an attorney, and they said over and over again, this is settled science, when in fact 80% of the American Academy of Pediatrics has called for a clinical review of the literature on which this whole recommendation is relying, and the AAP has turned them down time and time again. We can't even be honest about the fact that truly this is something out of Joseph Mengele's experimentation project. In fact, the entire hearing opened with a man who his clip was played, Dr. Blair Peters, who is a self-described queer surgeon at the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, said that essentially we're just kind of learning and figuring out what works. We know almost nothing about these outcomes. That is a direct quote. And Lars, it should truly strike fear in the heart of every parent of teenagers.
Well, and I've played those sound bites from that doctor. The doctor admits, well, I've been confused about my gender too. Well, who better to seek out advice from as to what to do with your teenage kids? But in the comments he made, that he's done in that tape or that video, he says, we are still just figuring this out. And I thought, can you imagine going to your doctor for any kind of consequential medical condition? And the doctor says, well, we're going to do this with you. And you say, does that work? Will that cure my condition? You say, well, we're still working on it, and we have high hopes. This is insanity. Are the Democrats taking note of the fact that Western Europe, which I think was tracking a little ahead of us, if you want to look at it that way, they were farther down the road, this gender transition road, than we were. They've pulled back hard. They've told a lot of their medical centers, stop doing this stuff. We're not sure what the long-term effects are, and they've backed off of it. Usually the Democrats and the progressives love to say, well, in Europe they do it this way. Are they admitting that Europe has realized this was a colossal disaster?
You know, it's interesting because The Hill ran a piece recently about why Europe and America are going in opposite directions on youth transgender medicine. And ultimately, at bottom, we're not using the best available medicine, data, or methodology. Europe has already rejected the U.S. gender affirming model, and they've said, listen, we may have gotten ahead of ourselves. Let's go counseling first. Let's see how these individuals are doing after the age of 18. Listen, you can do anything you want to your body after you're 18, right? So I have 3 teenagers. I fully understand this. My 19-year-old, God bless you. Go do what you want. Okay, you're a mature adult now. I fully believe that. But my 16-year-old daughter, I will be darned if someone says to her, let's cut off both your breasts because you sort of indicated some discomfort with normal pubertal development and unwanted attention from males, which is exactly what Chloe Cole testified. Her story was absolutely earth-shattering when she said, I was let down by the entire medical profession. And here she is now, still a teenager, saying, I will never be able to breastfeed my child. I've lost my breast. No one said, let's pump the brakes. Instead, they rushed her through the trans pipeline. And I will tell you, just like Europe, when we saw the Tavistock Clinic go belly up because of the claims that there was medical malpractice, we are just getting started on medical malpractice here in the United States.
Well, see, and I wondered about that because I'll make a comparison. I'm talking to Sarah Parshall-Perry, who's the legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at Heritage. The medical establishment got blasted because they said you pushed opiates on these patients or you didn't properly advise them how to take them. They became addicted.
Right.
They were damaged and all that. And that's a little piece of advice about taking one drug. This isn't making wholesale changes to your body. If Purdue Pharma and the rest of these guys all got sued, for billions for that, what's going to happen when a whole bunch of detransitioners say, you not only did that, you encouraged me to do this, and you did it as when I was a child, when I couldn't give truly informed consent because I had no idea what was going on. I was 15 years old. It sounds like this is going to be the Full Employment Act for the legal profession.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think we're just sort of trying to, at least those of us who are rational and sound thinking, kick around at the edges of that precise claim. We saw it with narcotics. We've seen it in medical malpractice claims with the use of particular instruments. Netflix documentaries on it. Before I believe that we are out of this decade, we will see an ultimate financial reckoning because we know how close organizations like Big Pharma are to funding this ideology. In fact, Big Pharma, Pfizer, underwrites the Human Rights Campaign's equity index, and that's the way HRC determines whether or not a hospital approves of and offers care to LGBTQIA individuals. Well,
absolutely. Sarah Parshall-Perry, who's at the Heritage Foundation and the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Sarah, thank you very much. We're going to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to grab some of your calls, and then I'm going to tell you about this. It sounds like Sam Bankman-Fried, who funneled $90 million in stolen money to the Democrat Party, is now getting one of those solid Democrat favors, kind of like Hunter Biden got, because guess what? They have now decided, federal prosecutors, so that means Merrick Garland's people, thank God that guy never got on the U.S. Supreme Court, say they will not pursue a campaign finance charge against FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried because it fails on procedure. In other words, they don't want to go after this guy because if they did, they'd then have to talk about how all that money got funneled to all of those, mostly Democrats, and into Democrat campaigns, and they don't want to go there. To your calls now at 866 Hey Lars, then I'll get back to the other in a moment. Brenda, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. You heard my mention of the Carl's Jr. Diablo burger and the fact that they're selling it for $6.66, 666 being the mark of the beast, or that's the number people identify. And my only question was, what is Carl's Jr. trying to communicate to its customers?
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. There's been a lot of different companies. I remember hearing about Monster Energy being called Satanist or something. So are they trying to get attention? Bad publicity is still publicity. Are they thinking that, they can go on the curtails of Bud Light, even though things bad happened? I mean, again, bad publicity is still publicity. They think maybe the rebels will be like, I'm going to buy that burger because it has Satan's number on it. So maybe they'll sell more. I'm just wondering what happened at the PR roundtable when they decided to do this marketing campaign.
That's the part, because I actually said words, almost the same words you did, when I've asked my producers, when Target, had their company marketing meeting, and they said, some junior level staffer said, hey, we should have girls' swimsuits that have a place to tuck away the physical parts of a little boy who wants to wear a girl's swimsuit. Who at that table said, that's a great idea. Parents have been asking for that for years. We need to stock dozens. Who thought about that? Now, Brenda, I will tell you this, and I do listen to the other side. We like naysayers on the show, 866-439-5277. But some of my producers have said, well, it's a number. It's yes, it's the devil burger, and I've had people say, oh, they say it's hot as hell. Oh, okay, but you could say it's very, very hot. I mean, there have been lots of food products that have been sold as being hot and spicy and all that. But, if you were marketing a pickup truck, would you say it was stronger than a Nazi? Or if you had fireworks, would you say better fireworks than Ted Kaczynski?
They're trying to get some sort of attention, a publicity on the dark side or what, because people are talking about it. We're talking about it right now.
I know, but I don't know that. I don't know that the people listening are going to say, Lars has inspired me to go down to Carl's, and I don't have anything to dislike or like about. I mean, look, I've been to Carl's Jr. before. I've been to and the rest, and Jack in the Box and all that. But it just makes me wonder: are they trying to communicate to us that they take something that for Christians is symbolic, and why is it Christian symbology is the only one that you can make fun of and play with? Would they ever?
Targeted, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you said, because you could do a lot involving the Muslims, you could you could make other comparisons to other artifacts from other religions, and people would say you can't do that. Well, why is it that Christians are fair
game? No matter what they picked.
No, that's right. That is true. Brenda, thanks for the call. Let's go to Chris. Chris, welcome to the program. You want to sound off on the devil burger too?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, this is just like, I guess, my standpoint, but I don't understand what the confusion is about because, I mean, they're advertising a spicy sandwich, which is supposed to be spicy, correlates with heat, fire, symbolize the devil, right? That's going to, they're going for a clever advertisement. So, obviously, the price correlates with the image of the burger that they're selling. So, I mean, for me, it's like the case is closed before it's open. I mean, I know it's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, but that's just my standpoint. I feel like...
Well, I understand that, but that's the only way to communicate that is by using a symbol in the 666 that has particular significance to one religion. Why? Why go there when you could go 1,000 other directions and say our burgers are so hot? And you could have a marketing meeting and come up with 50 different ways to describe hot food that don't involve using a Christian symbol and then coupling it with the name Diablo.
Yeah, I agree. There's totally a bunch of ways they could do it. I mean, I just think that I would assume that from their standpoint, they didn't think about it that deeply, like they were going to, advertise it in the direction of religion. It does correlate, 666 does, it is correlated to religion.
Why didn't they make it 667 or 664? I mean, they clearly were making a reference that whoever wrote it up in the ad copy and everything else had to know the significance of that number to the roughly 1/3 of the people on planet Earth who are practicing Christians, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just think it's like the price correlates with the devil correlates with fire or heat, and I feel like that was just, I mean, like I said, that's just my standpoint, but...
No, I get it, I get it, but aren't there comparisons that we don't make about things, because they're just out of line? And I haven't sat down and spent a lot of time trying to come up with 4 or 5 of them. More deadly than Ted Bundy, or more deadly than the Green River Killer, comparisons. You'd say it's kind of an awkward comparison to make.
Yeah, for sure.
Because these days there have been so many companies that have, put on, let's have a display of satanic stuff. And you go, who are we selling to exactly if we're selling to people who identify with a satanic store display? You know, are we selling to the freakish 0.1% who think that's cool and not to the majority of people who say, no, that's not a good comparison that you want to make? Anyway, that's sort of my take on it. I'm going to do one more on Diablo. Victor, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Yeah, basically, straight to the point. I believe that it's all about getting it, like, it's not about, like, pushing it on people. It's about younger generation just getting used to it. You know how the more you see something, the more you start reacting, like, less worried about. Like,
I've used the term norming. Does that fit?
That's exactly what it is, including the stuff with Target. Same exact thing. They're just putting it out there. Sure, people don't agree with it, but eventually you see it often enough where you're like, you know what? Like, it starts growing on people. And us as Christians, we can't do that, but with a lot of other people, that's just what happens.
See, and I think that's exactly what the danger is, because it's just a hamburger, it's just a dollar figure. Who cares? But norming things is disturbing. In the same way that apparently Bud Light thought, you know, we're going to norm the idea that even a transgender type like Dylan Mulvaney, that's part of the normal landscape of things. I mean, if you went back 20 or 30 years and said, we got a guy dressed up like a girl, you say, well, that's kind of weird. Why? No particular reason. He just thinks he's a girl. And you say, but if we put it in enough shows, if we put it in enough ads, then people will just begin to say, okay, I guess that's what it is, and we'll just get used to it. I don't want to get used to things that are wrong.
Right. And for me, personally, it's kids, the next generation. Like, we understand that it's wrong, but the next generation might see it like, hey, I remember it for 20 years. It should be okay. So that's how I feel about it, at least.
And you know what? I think you're right on target. I think that's exactly what's going on, unfortunately. Glad to be with you on a Conspiracy Theory Thursday. Always glad to take your phone calls and your emails at 866-HEY-LARS. Coming up, there's a 60-year-old rule that limits direct flights to and from Washington, D.C. We'll tell you why that's so important right now, coming up in a moment. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get to your calls. I want to talk to my friend Seton Motley, though, about something that is a bit inside baseball, or at least inside the belt line, which is the way of defining parts of Washington, D.C. I go there as little as I possibly can, but one of the first trips I took to Washington, D.C., working in radio, was a couple of decades ago. And I asked somebody, so I'm flying out of Reagan, that's DCA, the big airport that's closest to the city. I said, how much time should I plan to get out to the airport? And they said 10 minutes. I said, you got to be kidding me. 10 minutes? They said, yep. Congress kept it open after 9/11, after the terrorist attacks, even though it makes no sense whatsoever to have a major airport where your approach comes right over the Pentagon and right over the city of Washington, D.C. But they did it because it was convenient for members of Congress. And that is part of what Seton Motley wrote about. But he also wrote about a rule about how many flights you can have from how far away. I didn't even know about that one. Seton, welcome back. Would you mind describing this now 60-year-old rule that limits the number of flights that come from more than about 1,000 miles away?
Right, it's about 1,250. I think is the mileage cap. It's not a cap on the number of flights directly. It's a cap on the distance. And of course, you've got members of Congress outside that circle who want to get rid of the rules so they can fly directly into DCA. Now, keep in mind, Washington, D.C. has 3 airports. New York City has 3 airports. Washington, D.C. has 800,000 people. New York has 6 million.
Yep.
That's
big difference.
Self-serving in and of itself. But I was born and raised in Alexandria, which is the same city right across the Potomac River, as you described, from D.C. And I remember when they opened Dulles in '62, I wasn't born yet, but the discussion was, well, they're going to open Dulles, which is in Western Virginia. It's an hour away if you drive it at 3 in the morning. Otherwise, it's closer to 2 hours. But if the talk was, okay, they've got BWI, Baltimore, Washington. They've got Dulles now. They're going to wind down and close DCA.
Right.
Because it's, like you said, it's dumb to have an international airport that close to the nation's capital. Well, people who live there, like myself, laughed because we knew Congress was never going to let that happen.
Yep.
And so every 5 years when they reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration, this rule comes up. The Congress tries to get rid of this rule that limits the distance. Well, obviously they're already overcrowded at Reagan, at the Reagan Airport. Last summer they were the third worst for cancellations and delays. And remember, Congress isn't even in session in the summer, so they were awful without Congress involved. Then you're going to add in, not only is it's going to be crazy with more Congress people flying in and all their attending staff, but we've just added, I say we because I was born in Alexandria, about 5 miles from the airport, Amazon just added its second headquarters.
I was going to say, as you described them, and I love Seaton's writing, destroyer of worlds, product thief extraordinaire, retail murderer Amazon is debuting its HQ2 literally a few miles from DCA. And explain why both DCA, Reagan Airport, and the 1250-mile rule limit is significant to Amazon saying, we're going to come in with phase one and 14,000 employees. Why is that significant?
Because their headquarters one is in Seattle, which is outside the flight limit. So if you get rid of the flight limit, not only are you going to add all the congressional idiots, but you're going to have these managers and these staffers shuttling back and forth between Seattle and DCA, between Reagan's. I keep saying DCA. I'm sorry. That's Reagan.
I like
Airport.
Reagan. I know the union guys who work at the airport don't like us calling it Reagan, but I love calling it Reagan.
Right. Well, yes, it's DCA is their code. If you go to Travelocity, DCA is the airport code. But anyway, it's Reagan, and you're going to be adding all those back and forth trips between a major, the destroyer of worlds and the retailers, Amazon, going back and forth between Seattle and DC and Reagan, which they currently can't do because of the rule. So, I mean, Alexandria is insane anyway because it's a giant city. It's kind of large and sprawling and spread out like LA, not as big as LA, but it's very, very spread out. But the portion we're talking about is right on the GW Parkway and Route 1, which is crammed up against the Potomac River. So obviously you can't go further east into the Potomac River. And you've got this little sliver of Route 1 and the GW Parkway where the airport is, where the headquarters are. It's really, really tight. And I have family that lives there, lots of family that lives there, and it's already incredibly overcrowded. The GW Parkway, I think, is 8 or 9 times the amount of traffic it was designed for. It was never supposed to be a rush hour transport. It was supposed to be a sightseeing transport, but because the area is so overcrowded that it's become a daily commute thing. And
by the way, that 1250 mile limit on the number of flights in and out, it also works the other way. New York City is not that far away. I think it's 45 minutes by an airplane. And they run, I think they still do even after the pandemic, run so many flights back and forth between New York and Washington, D.C., that you can literally catch one almost every half an hour. And so it becomes really convenient for people who want to. So the bottom line of all this is Congress is going to be selfish. You've got a lot more members of Congress out west now who are beyond the 1250 limit. And they're going to want to change this, even though it's a big security nightmare, or it makes the security nightmare bigger, and it makes the traffic nightmare bigger, and all of this because of the selfishness of members of Congress.
It's one of my favorite expressions from NBA legend Pat Riley. That player is drowning in Lake Me, and Congress is drowning in Lake Me. And yes, this is all about serving themselves and making it more convenient because, they want to, when the weekend comes or when recess comes, they want to jump in a car,
they want to have a staff member and drive them in a car, right?
Right. And it only takes, in the middle of the day, like I said, off hour, it's maybe a 15-minute drive to Reagan, and they get dropped off and they jump on a plane. Dulles is an hour away minimum on the best of traffic circumstances. And, they're fighting for this. and all the it's a big point of contention, I would guess, between the members of Congress inside the flight line and outside the flight line.
Absolutely. That's Seton Motley. He's the president of Less Government, and he's a good friend of this show. Your calls are welcome at 866-HEY-LARS. Send emails to talk@larslarson.com, and be sure to tell Alexa to play the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on what we have always called Conspiracy Theory Thursday. Glad to have you with me. I want to tell you about a new development that just came down literally within the last 30 minutes or so involving Donald Trump. And you kind of knew that this is what we're going to expect. That as the Biden crime family gets closer and closer to the big guy's impeachment, and that is Joe Biden. That you knew that they were going to amp up the attacks on Donald Trump because Joe Biden saw what happened yesterday in Delaware in that federal court when Hunter Biden, the smartest guy that Joe ever met, or so Joe would have you believe, was going to walk in, get a slap on the wrist, and walk right out the door. And you knew that, when that happened, he basically had said there's two classes of people in America. Those who are in power and their friends and family members, and they can get away with anything, and everybody else is held to the nth degree. Guess what's happened now? Donald Trump has been charged with trying to delete Mar-a-Lago surveillance footage in a brand new indictment. So the answer is, when the Biden crime family is in greater danger, greater peril, and impeachment seems to be in the wings right now, because Andy McCarthy said on Monday, not Andy McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker said on Monday, Andy's a former federal prosecutor and he's a good friend of the show, but Kevin McCarthy said, yep, we are going to consider impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. Well, like I said, the more trouble Joe is in, the more they're going to try to amp up their attacks on Donald Trump, who a majority of Republicans favor as the Republican nominee, and the Democrats are going absolutely crazy. So here's the way the Hill.com is reporting it. The Justice Department is now accusing former President Trump of attempting to delete surveillance footage at his Mar-a-Lago property in a new superseding indictment. That means it replaces the last one, filed in a classified records case today. The DOJ says that Trump acted as a new co-conspirator to try to delete the footage and also charged him with additional Espionage Act charges. You want my perspective on this? You know I'm a Trump supporter, so don't hold that against me. In fact, hold it in favor of me. I think it's the only sensible thing anybody can do right now. But what they're saying is Donald Trump illegally kept papers that he wasn't entitled to keep. I don't think he's guilty of that. And then now they're trying to say he tried to get rid of the surveillance footage that might have helped them prove that he kept the documents that he wasn't supposed to keep. So in other words, they built kind of a house of cards. It all depends on whether or not Donald Trump broke the law. And personally, not just because I support him, I always told you from the time he announced for president, from the time in the early part of 2020 that I endorsed Donald Trump on this program from CPAC, which is less conservative than it used to be, I said, if Donald Trump is wrong, I'll be glad to call him out. And I have done that on a number of occasions. In this case, I don't think he broke the law. I do think that Joe Biden has broken the law, and I do think that Joe Biden richly deserves to be impeached for the crimes, the peddling of influence that earned the Biden crime family millions of dollars. And consider this, from the early days of Trump's presidency, you would listen to anybody from the mainstream media, mostly to the left, and anybody from the progressive left of politics. They would tell you, Donald Trump is just in office to make money, nothing else. Do you know it cost Donald Trump about $1 billion in personal net worth to be president of the United States? He lost money in the deal. Now, Barack Hussein Obama became a more than 100 millionaire. And Joe Biden's family has made millions of dollars over the years, and not by legal activities, but by illegal activities. So they always seem to accuse the other side of doing exactly the thing it is that they are doing themselves. In any case, glad to have you on the show. Coming up this hour, are your children unknowingly being subjected to a hidden agenda promoting ideas that don't align with American values, but with Chinese propaganda? We'll talk about that a bit later. Will the GOP prioritize strengthening its slim House majority and focus on the 2024 election, or will it risk short-term gains for potential long-term harm? Has Joe Biden undermined the U.S. steel industry to help out his Chinese communist buddies? You know, the ones who bought and paid for him a long time ago? And I want you to take just a moment to cast a vote in our Twitter poll. We put up a brand new poll question every day at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com. Should the news media call out Joe Biden's lies the way they did every single day with Donald Trump? Let me give you the latest example. Joe Biden's been talking about gas prices. He's running around in what is clearly a political campaign claiming that he has lowered gas prices. Let me put the lie to that right away. Gas prices did go above $5 a gallon, largely because of what Joe Biden had done. That happened in the first 18 months. This week, they rose to a still high price of $3.69 a gallon, or about $1.30 a gallon, not quite 40% more than they were on the day that he took office. So the average driver is paying roughly a $20 Biden tax on every single fill-up. Now, does the media call him out on that? Not usually. Should the news media call out Biden's lies the way they did every day with Trump? I'd say yes to that. And if you're a naysayer, I'd be glad to hear the argument. 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. And our Twitter poll brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in. I joined the group a long time ago, and you can too. It's easy. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC's better. Better for you and better for America. Now, yesterday's poll question, should the Federal Trade Commission break up Amazon even if they do so at the cost of America's economy? I said no, they should not. 68% of you joined me in that no vote, but 32% of you want the Federal Trade Commission to break up Amazon. To your calls. Let's start with Mike in Texas. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening on KTSA. What's on your mind today?
A few things, but I'll get right to the point, Lars. It's a great program. Sure. So I'm just thinking with all this stuff with Hunter, his father, the Chinese influence, just, you know, this isn't something new. It's been going on for a long time. And, I mean, is it really a conspiracy theory to think that they didn't already have this COVID-19 available for push out in the event that something was going to upset the powers in play? And, I mean, they saw Trump's rallies when for thousands of people where they had lined up and stood overnight to stay. And, you know, Biden couldn't even fill up a small train station. I just don't understand why there's still this idea that that couldn't happen. And then, again, with the vote, I mean, ballots coming in from everywhere that all of a sudden at night, you know, you see Trump ahead, and then all of a sudden the counting stops. You go to sleep, and you wake up, and you find out he didn't win. And there was an overwhelming millions beyond any record for Biden when he had no rallies that considered, you know, that had anybody at him. I mean,
no, all of that makes perfect sense. I don't disagree with a single thing that you've said. The only thing that's been a theory since the beginning of the pandemic, and I've heard it 100 times, I don't know how to wrap my head around this, Mike. You're China. You got America to help pay for gain-of-function research to create what was a virus that didn't infect humans to infect humans and then do tremendous damage. And you turn it loose on your own population and then turn it loose on the rest of the world. My theory has always been that it was an accidental release, but once it was released accidentally in China, they decided to infect the rest of the world, and they should pay consequences for that. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Thursday, and always glad to welcome back our old friend Bob Barr, former CIA analyst, member of Congress, but those are the lesser accolades, the newly elected, relatively newly elected, first vice president of the board at the NRA. Bob, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, especially after those nice accolades.
Well, you know, the thing is, I do put board of directors of the NRA much higher than member of Congress these days. But you wrote recently at Town Hall about what the Congress is doing and about whether or not the Republican Party can, I guess, find its way to lose where it should be winning. Would you mind describing to our audience how you think they might end up doing it right or perhaps screwing it all up?
Well, they could start by doing something, Lars, fairly basic, like developing something called a revolutionary concept, a strategy. A strategy means you have a goal, and then you figure out a way to get there by going from A to B to C to D and to your goal, and you coordinate those different pieces, those various steps, so you actually improve your chances of reaching your goal. They just don't seem to understand that. They go off on tangents constantly. They change their mind. They let their own members get in the way of messaging, and whether it's the appropriations process or whether it's an impeachment issue, they just don't seem, especially in the House, to have the ability to develop a strategy and stick to it.
Although, don't forget, it was the Senate where Lindsey Graham, right before the last election, decided for some crazy reason to launch, I agreed with the point of the bill on abortion, but the point was all of us understood this is not the time to bring that up, nor do we need a federal law making abortion a federal decision right after the Supreme Court said it's up to the states and it's being handled very well there. And he did a lot of damage and achieved absolutely nothing out of it. Would that be an example of not going from A to B to C?
It's a perfect example, and we see it in both the House and the Senate. For example, I'm pro-life, and I'm proud to. When I was with the Libertarian Party, I was one of a small group of pro-life libertarians. I think life is important. It's a gift from God, and it ought to be cherished and protected.
Absolutely.
But in the legislative process, if you have an appropriations bill and you have 11 other appropriations bill, and the American people are looking for you to pass a budget and to pass these bills, don't let these smaller items, which aren't going to be passed into law anyway, given the character of the Senate and the president, don't let those interfere with accomplishing your ultimate goal. And the worst example I saw just the other day, I think I might have written about it in the article you're referring to, is there are actually some Republicans in the House that are gearing up for a government shutdown. Government shutdowns rarely benefit the party that pushes for them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that it isn't a good idea, but there's a time and a place for it, and you engage in that sort of brinksmanship only if the time is right and it's to achieve an eventual important goal. And we did that way back in 95 and 96. We had a government shutdown, the purpose of which was not to get a particular budget passed, but it was to establish a process with Bill Clinton whereby we were able within a year and a half to balance the budget. Talking about a government shutdown now simply because the Republicans might not get a rider in a particular appropriations bill is a typical, another example of the short-sighted, tactic-driven process rather than strategic.
I want to ask you then about Tommy Tuberville's effort to say we want the Pentagon to stop paying for abortions and flying service members around the country and giving them 3 weeks off leave to obtain an abortion. And he's holding up some military promotions, but I actually applauded his efforts. Am I wrong?
I applaud his efforts too, up to a point. When you engage when you're engaged in a war, as we are with the Democrats, you have to realize, I think, that at some point when you've made your point on something and you know that legislatively there is no chance you're going to get something passed or you're going to do more damage by pressing the issue, there is nothing wrong with backing off of something, getting part of what you want, and saving some of your ammunition for the next election, after the next election cycle. And that should be our primary goal in the House and the Senate, and particularly the House, because I think we could lose the majority in the House if we continue with this sort of strategic less process. By going off one day we're talking about impeaching Mayorkas. The next day we're talking about, well, we can't really impeach Biden, but maybe we can possibly have an inquiry of impeachment. There doesn't seem to be any coordination of what we're doing.
Tell me this, though, because, Bob, I've been advocating for impeaching Biden, but I want to do it based on high crimes and misdemeanors. I believe that Joe Biden has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, the pay for play that has earned the Biden crime family millions of dollars. Am I wrong to say they ought to have an inquiry? They ought to get witnesses, and it'd be pretty easy to get a short list of witnesses. The IRS whistleblowers, Devin Archer, call a few of those people up, get them to testify in public and say, has the big guy committed high crimes and misdemeanors, then take a vote and double dog dare the Democrats to vote no on it, which they will, but they'll look foolish.
No, listen, I agree with you entirely. I think that there is more than sufficient evidence already in the public arena to justify an inquiry of impeachment. But what you don't want to do is to fall into the trap of letting the Democrats say, because Marjorie Taylor Greene puts up these pictures of Biden, Hunter Biden doing gross things, that becomes the issue, and it gives the Democrats the opportunity to say, oh, see, it's all about Hunter Biden. It's all about sex, which is exactly what the Clinton people did back during his impeachment. If you're going to have an inquiry, and I think the time is right for it, stick to the substantive issues and don't let some of these firebrands go off on tangents which don't accomplish your goal and don't help accomplish it, but give Democrats ammunition to belittle what you're doing.
Well, and see, Bob, I've tried to take your approach. I've learned from you over the years. But yesterday, when the federal judge threw out that ridiculous sweetheart deal for Hunter Biden, I said the real focus here is Joe, because yes, it's a bad thing if somebody doesn't declare their income, as Hunter Biden did not, on about $10 million in income. Yes, it's a crime if you buy a gun illegally. But my concern is the president of the United States is compromised by the bribery, basically bribery activities that he and his family have engaged in. And I suspect that one of the reasons we're sending so much money to Ukraine is because Joe Biden knows there are people in Ukraine who could out him tomorrow. And why he's being so favorable to China, because he knows the Chinese, the Politburo in Beijing could easily out him tomorrow. Yeah, we paid millions of dollars through CEFC straight to Hunter and then on to Joe. And we own this guy because he knows we can out him anytime we want. Having a president compromised in that way, that's got to be high crimes and misdemeanors, isn't it?
It is, and that needs to be the focus of where we would go with an inquiry of impeachment, not pictures of Hunter Biden engaged in perverse sexual activity or whatever it was, but following, as John Le Carre used to say in his spy novels, the gold seam, follow the money. Lay that out, get the evidence, whether it goes to Ukraine and back again or Beijing and back again. You've laid out the case right there, and the Republican leadership in the House, where the inquiry would vest, needs to control its members so they don't go off on these other tangents which reduce the credibility of the effort itself.
I think that's great advice. Bob, thank you very much. We always appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.
Speaking of being sold out to China, consider this. President Biden on the campaign trail claimed to be the most union president you've ever seen. But according to the steel companies and the unions, he's actually favoring China. And I'll tell you how. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday. So before I tell you how Joe Biden is selling out union workers and our steel industry to the communist Chinese, I thought I'd take a call or two. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you want to be a naysayer, we'll put you right to the head of the line. I get a lot of naysayers by email, and I say, hey, why don't you call the show? Make your best argument, see how it goes over. Most of them chicken out when it comes to that point. 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Let me go first to Ray in Alabama. Hey, Ray, you must have heard me mention, and I did nothing more than a passing mention of it, but I just asked, what in the heck is Carl's Jr., a fast food place that I've patronized from time to time, like most of the rest. I like fast food, too much, it seems. But I wonder what's the message they're trying to send when they come out with the Diablo Burger, the Devil Burger, and then sell it for $6.66. Are they trying to tell Christians something?
I don't think so at all. It's just a marketing ploy. 666, Diablo, it all kind of goes together. And it gets people talking. Because
It
here in
does.
Alabama, I don't know if you know this or not, east of the Mississippi, we don't have Carl Jr.'s. We have Hardee's.
Hardee's. And I've been to Hardee's. Hardee's makes good food, too.
Same restaurant, pretty much same restaurant, same owners, different food. Hardee's does not have the Diablo burger that I know of. I could be wrong.
That's an interesting choice. Although I wouldn't have split it east-west. I would have split it north-south. You know, put the devil up north and let the South keep their Christian values.
I know there's a lot of devils out there your way anyway, I think, personally. Not my opinion, but, you know. But anyway, it gets people talking. It gets attention because I had never heard of it until you mentioned it.
Well, I only mention it because it just seemed odd to me because a lot of companies are sending a lot of really odd messages these days. I mean, I've told people before that my family and I we did like Disney. Tina and I went on one of our first date trips, after we'd been dating for quite a time. We dated for almost 2 years, down to Disneyland on the West Coast, and because I live on the left coast. And we loved it. But then we saw what the company's been doing the last few years. The first 4 or 5 years of my granddaughter's life, she's now 7, we took her to Disney about once a year, and it's a bit of a trip from where we live. And we thought it was great, and then we saw, no, they're pushing a bunch of really bad stuff. And for the life of me, Ray, I can't wrap my head around that one because you have a company that specifically aims its products and its services at families and kids in particular. That's accurate if I were to describe Disney, wouldn't it be?
Yes, absolutely.
And then they turn around and say, but we have to accommodate the LGBTQ plus, agenda. We've got to accommodate things that are less than family oriented and sometimes almost anti-family. And I wonder, why would somebody who wants to cater to families and kids come out with stuff that's anti-family and anti-kids?
Because all they're interested in nowadays is the almighty dollar.
No, but have you seen what's happened to Disney's value? They've lost billions of dollars, and Target has lost billions of dollars, and Bud Light. Bud was in the beer business, and all of a sudden they go political, and they lose gigantic billions of dollars of value. How is that all about the almighty dollar?
Well, I tell you, as far as Bud Light, I've always drank Bud Light. I still do. I do not call it Bud Light no more, though.
What do you call it?
I now have a different name for it.
Do you have a new name you can say on the radio?
Yes. I call
What
it
is
Tranny Fluid. Tranny Fluid.
Well, because, look.
But it gets people talking.
It does.
Talking about
and I've heard, Ray, I've heard the adage that all publicity is good publicity. That is generally true, but all of us can cite lots of examples of things where a lot of publicity was not a good thing for the company, for the individual, or whoever. And you wonder, I just wonder what they're thinking about. If Hardee's came out and said, we've got better ground meat than Jeffrey Dahmer, would that be a good marketing approach? And I would think somebody would say, no, we're not going there. That's disgusting and evil. Well, and that's, or, for people who are anti-technology, and look, I like technology, but technology has its limits. I still am not going to go full Ted Kaczynski, though, because that's too far. And I just wonder, are they actually trying to make money, or do they start to care more about the politics than they do about the dollar? Ray, thanks a lot. I appreciate the call from Alabama. I mentioned Joe Biden. And on the campaign trail, so that would have been 2020, Joe Biden ran around saying he would be the most pro-union president that you've ever seen. Now, I know a number of union workers who can't stand Joe Biden. And it's not because of a personal thing. It's because they can't stand the fact that the guy is a hypocrite and a liar and about 6 other things. Well, consider this most recent development and ask yourself this. Is he being true to America, to his union buddies, or is he being true to his Chinese masters in Beijing? The Daily Caller has the story. A group of the largest steelmakers in America and the Steelworkers Union. So that's labor and management together, sent a joint letter out day before yesterday to the Treasury Department. And what they were talking about was a Biden administration policy that would allow tax incentives to help Chinese steel makers. Now, does that make any sense for America? Does it make any sense for the unions? In the letter, this is from the Daily Caller, the United Steelworkers Union and top steel companies criticized the plan to grant a bonus tax credit for green energy projects that rely on U.S.-made metal and components due to the policy leaving space for solar panel firms to use foreign steel for certain components and still qualify for a 10% tax credit. Now, if you're putting, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000 worth of solar panels on your roof, a 10% credit is some serious money. The key concern, they said in the letter, is the classification of a mechanism that points the solar panels toward the sun following its movement, called a photovoltaic tracker, which the Treasury defines as a manufactured product, and they exclude it from the requirements to use domestic steel. Now, if you ask me why this is happening, it's because Joe Biden is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Chinese communists. And why? Because of the millions of dollars transferred to the Biden crime family from CEFC, the big Chinese energy company, through Hunter Biden to the Biden crime family. Joe Biden is bought and paid for, and he's helping out the Chinese. I mean, I've complained generically about the whole green agenda that Joe Biden is pushing, because he wants to put hundreds of billions of dollars of American taxpayer money into solar panels made in China, windmills made in China, battery-powered cars, and the batteries that power them made in China. Now, that's a tremendous gift to China. It's no gift at all for the United States of America. So when Joe Biden runs around saying, I'm going to be good to American unions, and then he pulls nonsense like this, I just don't buy it. By the way, I want to mention this as well. Question of the day: are American classrooms becoming little red classrooms? Parents Defending Education, which is a group dedicated to fighting indoctrination in classrooms, they say they found evidence linking the Chinese Communist Party financial entities to American K through 12 schools. The findings are in a report called Little Red Classrooms, sent out to 34 governors, key lawmakers, and committee chairs on Wednesday. They found millions of dollars of China-linked funding is flowing right into America's K through 12 classrooms. That's where your kids are. Back in just a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show on Conspiracy Theory Thursday. John Solomon joins me now, political commentator and founder of JustTheNews.com. John, I want to talk to you about the Hunter Biden case and the prosecution, or the possible testimony of the Delaware prosecutor. But I want to ask you about something that came down within about the last hour that I imagine you probably, as usual, knew all about way ahead of time. So Hunter Biden has his plea deal fall apart, and the very next day, what a surprise, another indictment of Donald Trump, this one having to do with an allegation that he tried to have video surveillance at Mar-a-Lago deleted. Welcome to the show, and tell us what you know.
Yeah, listen, this actually was a surprise. I think it was a surprise even to the president's lawyers. A superseding indictment. It happens sometimes in cases. I think the Trump campaign would call this piling on. But now, not only is the president facing 3 additional felony charges, one of his former maintenance staffers also facing charges, basically alleging that they were trying to get rid of evidence in the case. I suspect that there'll be a very strong pushback from President Trump and his legal team once they digest this and go after it. They were, getting ready to fight over the January 6th indictment that is, been notified and targeted, and instead this came out of left field. So it's going to take a couple days for them probably to come back together and give a response. But I'm sure they have a response. The president tonight just saying more election interference. That's what this is. But I think there'll be a more substantive response on the evidence of whether this really was an effort to delete video footage when you get to see it.
Well, and let me ask you about that. I mean, 2 things. One, as we head further toward November of 24, are we just going to see the Biden administration and the deep state just pile up as many charges as they possibly can? Is that the strategy?
It seems to be, right? We've got 30-something charges in New York, 37 prior to tonight, now 40 charges here, maybe another round of charges. You look at some of the polling data that's now coming out in everyday Americans, not just Republicans, everyday Americans see this as a form of political retribution. That's not good for the justice system. And you compare it to the problems that have occurred to his competitor, Joe Biden, all of the allegations by the FBI and IRS whistleblowers that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were getting sweetheart deals. People really are beginning to see a system that doesn't feel comfortable, feels more like it belongs in a banana republic than in the United States. And that's not my assessment. That's what the polling data is beginning to show.
Well, and that's good news for Donald Trump and bad news for Joe Biden, which, as far as I'm concerned, is okay. But am I right in suspecting that the reason they've gone after Trump plus the maintenance man, just as they went after Trump plus his valet, Walt Nauta, that the reason they're doing that is they're trying to find somebody on Trump's staff who will say what they want him to say in exchange for not going to prison?
Yeah, I haven't been able to really talk to the Justice Department to try to understand the strategy here. That is consistent of things that we have seen in cases. It happens in mob cases. It happens in drug cases. It happens as a classic tactic of federal investigators to try to break someone in hopes that they roll up or that they'll roll up in return for getting their charges dropped or diminished. We just don't know enough about this yet. But when you look at the overall case, I think a lot of people say, really, 77 charges against the former president for what? Paper mishandling? I think there's a lot here that people are starting to feel uncomfortable with. And when you contrast it to the way Joe Biden's family got treated, hey, you can't ask about the big guy. You can't have a search warrant, even though you met the standard of probable cause. They can't even get a plea deal right. The sweetheart plea deal gets blown up. I think people really do see disparate treatment between Republicans and Democrats in this same Justice Department.
Well, a sweetheart plea deal that effectively let him plead guilty to evading $1.5 million of declared income and get the other $8.3 million just forgotten. Let me ask you about the Delaware prosecutor, though, about whether or not David Weiss will be allowed to testify before the Congress about what's going on in the Hunter Biden tax case, because I keep reminding my audience, and I think I'm right about this, the focus here has to be Joe Biden. It's not Hunter Biden. You know, not that I don't want him to pay his taxes, because I pay my taxes. I want everybody to pay their taxes. But having said that, do I think it's much more important that we have a compromised American president? That should be the focus. Will the Congress be able to hear from David Weiss?
Yes, there are all signals that there'll be some form of limited testimony, may not as complete as Republicans want, in September. That's what Merrick Garland has offered. There was a letter sent from the Justice Department out to do that. That said, Republicans are not satisfied with the offer. They want all the documents. They want all the witnesses. Basically, DOJ's offer says, we'll give you a little bit of David Weiss, but you got to leave everybody else alone. And Congress said, that's not your choice.
They're trying
to
trade up?
They're
trying to trade. This sounds like a bunch of attorneys saying, well, you can get my client for this thing if you'll forget the other six. And now they're trying to work this on the Congress, saying, we'll give you this witness, but you have to agree not to ask for the other ones.
Listen, the witness that Congress really wants to get to is Leslie Wolf, the deputy to Weiss, who was so deeply involved with the agents. And she's such an important fact witness. Jim Jordan, James Comer, not going to fall for that. This is going to become a subpoena battle. But I do think we'll get David Weiss no matter what.
Well, let's talk about Devin Archer. Monday is Devin Archer, and he's going to testify behind closed doors. Is the public going to know what he had to say?
They'll find out pretty quickly. The Congress will put out, as James Comer has done in all these interviews, puts out a top-line summary, and then the transcript comes out a little bit later. Listen, I think there's something very important that happened yesterday that a lot of people didn't notice in the Hunter Biden case. Because the story was, the plea deal broke up. But before the plea deal blew up, Hunter Biden began to allocute, began to admit to the crimes that he was going to plead guilty to. And in the questioning by the judge, he acknowledged something that basically says, my dad is a liar. What did he say? He said, I did get $664,000 in 2017 from a communist Chinese company. Remember what Joe Biden has said, even as recently as a few weeks ago. My family never took any China money. His own son calls him out. Now, remember, his own family friend, Joe Biden's old family friend, recently gave an FBI interview and said, Joe Biden met with the Chinese too. Something else Joe Biden denied. Joe Biden told us the laptop was disinformation. That's wrong. One of the things that's happening is that in the court of public opinion, Joe Biden is now facing a jury who says, this man lied to us to get his job. That's going to be very consequential in 2024.
No doubt. Now, let me ask you about this. Ron DeSantis, justthenews.com, which is John Solomon's operation, he founded it, has the story, I think it's an exclusive, isn't it, that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has said if he became president, which seems less and less likely almost every day based on the polls, he's going to boot Christopher Wray out of the FBI and clean house at the Justice Department.
Yeah, very specific. Not only Justice Department, all the federal health agencies that mishandled the COVID-19. And I got a new story that's going to come out in the morning. He also is going to, he's very clear. He opposes a government-run digital currency, a national digital currency controlled by the Fed. Very big things. He had a lot of ideas. It was an hour-long interview, enormous ideas. Whether he wins or not, a very substantive interview, the sort of things I think Americans like to see of their candidates. Give us substance.
Absolutely right. That's John Solomon from justthenews.com.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
I'm not exactly sure, but I've got somebody out here in my backwood that's hurting his wife pretty bad, I guess. And his name is Robert Hanks.
That is a 911 emergency call about alleged domestic violence 3 years ago. And if you're saying to yourself, Lars, it's not that unusual. In fact, it's one of those things, sadly, that happens all the time in society, that 911 gets a call and someone says there's a person who's being hurt, possibly even killed in a domestic violence incident. That's about as far as it stays normal in this case, because what happened after that call, the call was based on secondhand information, meaning somebody told somebody else, who told somebody else, who told 911, there is domestic violence going on at this man's house, Robert Hanks. That happened 3 years ago. Robert Hanks is now in federal court suing because the police came and they arrested him. He had committed no crime. There was no evidence that he committed any crime. And there is evidence now that the police acted differently in Clark County, Washington, because Robert Hanks is a command sergeant major, retired from the National Guard. And they assumed that if he's a military veteran, he must be automatically more dangerous. He must be possibly more likely a criminal. He may have been involved in domestic violence because 911 was told, well, there are kids in that house. You mean there's a married man who's married to a woman living in a house with children in the house? Well, why, that's the worst kind. Those are the people most likely to be involved in domestic violence. And you say, Lars, that's a crazy way to look at the situation. Except that according to the filings by Clark County, Washington, that's exactly what they're telling a federal judge, that their deputies had every reason to show up at the address of Robert Hanks and assume he's a military veteran, he's more dangerous. He's a military veteran, he's more likely to be a criminal. He's a military veteran with kids and a wife, he's more likely to have committed domestic violence. Now, I want to tell you the details of this story, but first, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. Glad to have you on board for a little honestly provocative talk, and always glad to take your calls, but we'll do that a bit later. First, I want to bring on Angus Lee, who's also a veteran and a lawyer, and he's representing Robert Hanks, and looks like the line just gave up. So we'll get him back on the line here in just a moment. But I want to have him tell the story of his client, because if you've listened to this show for any length of time, you understand I am a supporter of law enforcement, but I always caveat that when people say you always back the cops. I say yes, as long as they're not breaking the law, as long as they're not breaking their department procedure. Angus Lee joins me now. Angus, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Hey, Lars, thanks for having me.
You represent Robert Hanks.
Yes, a distinguished military veteran who had his rights violated in a way that is really shocking, because not only were they a violation of his basic rights under the Fourth Amendment, but they were violated because of his service in the military, not in spite of it.
And by the way, you're not making that up. Clark County, Washington's attorneys have gone into court to defend their deputy's arrest of Robert Hanks on the basis that because he's a veteran, he's more dangerous. And they said that explicitly. Am I wrong?
You're absolutely correct. When a lawsuit is initiated, one of the things that you do is you file a list of factual allegations, and then the county can either admit those or deny them. And one of the series of factual allegations we asserted in this case was that the reason that the police treated Robert Hanks the way they did, the reason they were so aggressive with him, the reason they used a SWAT-style takedown of him when they had no probable cause to arrest at all, was because they viewed him differently, because he was a veteran, because he had served in the military. They considered him a dangerous person, and they treated him worse than the average citizen because he was a veteran, when they should have treated him at least as well, and frankly, a little bit better.
Okay, Angus, I'm talking to Angus Lee, who's an attorney representing Robert Hanks. Is it accurate to say that the county now, 3 years after this incident, walked into federal court and said, our deputies are justified in believing that a military veteran is, one, more dangerous, and two, more likely to be a criminal?
That's essentially the argument they made in writing, that the reason that the officers did what they did here, and to set the table a little bit, they responded to just a bare bones 911 call where somebody said, oh, I think something's happening essentially, but I didn't see anything. I don't know if they saw anything. And they did a whole SWAT takedown on him, and the county has attempted to justify that by saying, well, it's appropriate in this case because he's more dangerous because he's a veteran. And that's just not true.
Let me I also want to sketch this out for people. So they get the 911 call from a guy who says, well, my son's girlfriend says that she either heard or saw, he's not sure. He tells the dispatcher that. Take a listen to Pretty Bad is the soundbite I want to run, Donovan. Can we play that one right now, please?
Okay. And can you hear the husband, or what's going on?
My son's girlfriend just come running into the house and said that Hanks was down there beating on his wife or something, and to call 911. He was hurting her pretty bad.
That he was hurting her pretty bad. Okay, so 911 gets a call, secondhand information from somebody who's calling in, and then it takes 15 minutes for the deputies to get there, and they powwow out front of the house for another 15 minutes, even though the call indicated that there might be a woman being beaten or even killed at this address, but they sit out front for 15 minutes. When they go up to the house, describe what happened.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the 911 caller also told them that he doesn't know if she actually saw anything or not, and he's just guessing that anything happened. Now, the police took 15 minutes to drive out to the Hanks residence, and then when they got there, they spent 15 minutes where they observed no signs of anyone in distress, no signs of any criminal activity, and eventually Mr. Hanks, a law-abiding citizen, he becomes aware that law enforcement's out in the street in front of his house, and him and his wife open up the door and walk out to go see if they can be of assistance in any kind. And so Mr. Hanks politely walked out to them wearing shorts, a T-shirt, flip-flops, exactly what you would expect from somebody who was at home barbecuing, which is what he was doing. And he went out and greeted them and said to them, hey guys, what's up? And their response was an immediate SWAT takedown. Firearm was pointed at him. They had a shield. They had a canine unit out there. They had a beanbag launcher deployed. Very, very serious stuff. And then they put him on the gravel face down, kneeled on him, cuffed him behind his back, and held him while they searched his home.
I'm talking to Angus Lee. We're going to be back in a moment. I want to ask Donovan, check with Angus Lee and see if it's okay. We need to pull another segment because this is important that people understand all the circumstances. A military veteran, police come to his house on the basis of secondhand information. They do a SWAT-style takedown, and this is a guy, Robert Hanks, who actually works in the law enforcement business. We'll be back in a moment.
Did she see him hitting her, or did she just hear something?
I don't know if she seen him or not. She was pretty excited when she come in. So.
Okay, and do you know if Robert and his wife are the only people that live there, or are there any kids there?
Yes, there's kids there.
Little kids, or?
Yes, there's one little one, and one that's about 10 years old.
Oh.
That is from that 911 call 3 years ago involving ultimately the arrest of Robert Hanks, taken down by sheriff's deputies from Clark County, Washington. Angus Lee is the attorney representing him. And let me tell you why we're bringing this up today. On Friday, a federal court denied Clark County's motion to dismiss a civil rights lawsuit. that alleged wrongful arrest, assault, and an illegal search of Robert Hanks' home. Angus Lee is his attorney. So here he is, face down in the gravel, a SWAT-style arrest. He and his wife, who's the person who's supposed to have been the subject of domestic violence, an assault of some kind by Robert Hanks, are standing there talking to the deputies, and the deputies push him down in the gravel, handcuff him, and arrest him. Let me jump to the end of that particular part of the story, Angus, and tell me this. Was he ever charged with domestic violence or assault?
No, because it was 100% abundantly clear that he was totally innocent. He had done nothing wrong. The the son's girlfriend that claimed supposedly to have seen something had an active warrant out for her arrest at the time. And when Stephanie came out of the house, it was clear to her or to the law enforcement that she hadn't been injured in any way. And the reality of this situation is, look, when the police get a 911 call, they should respond. That's
Agreed.
great.
Agreed.
But what they're also supposed to do is recognize that their job is not to just respond blindly and arrest people. Their job is to investigate to see if there's any truth to the claim, which in this case there was not. They had a 15-minute drive where any one of them could have used their mobile phone to call, to investigate, to talk to the 911 caller. They didn't do that. They were on scene for 15 minutes, and they were next door to the house where the call came from. They never bothered to go over there, knock on the door. Hey, what can you tell us about this situation? And in spite of having no evidence, except for a call where the caller told them, I don't know if she saw anything, and I just guess this is what happened, they took this very aggressive action and chose not to investigate because they were so focused on the fact that they learned he was a veteran while they were en route.
And by the way, you told me something that may or may not be known to people, and that is these days, 911, not all of them, but perhaps this one, they'll look you up on social media if they have time and see what else do we know about this guy. Well, if they look somebody up and he's a gangbanger and he's flashing, illegal weapons or drugs or whatever, that might tell an officer something important. In this case, they found out he's a corrections deputy from Clark County and he's a military veteran, and that actually worked against him?
Yeah, not just a veteran, but he had attained the highest enlisted rank in the military. And they used that against him and viewed it as a negative and a reason to treat him more aggressively, which is just appalling to me as a veteran myself. A nation that does not honor its veterans will not have many.
I would agree with you. Angus, tell me, I'm talking to Angus Lee, the attorney for Robert Hanks, why is Clark County defending these actions instead of saying, look, Mr. Hanks, you've got our abject apology. We were wrong. You weren't guilty of anything. We never should have arrested you. You have our sincere apology. I was told once by a lawyer that most lawsuits like this are driven by people getting angry, and they say, you haven't done right by me, so I'm going to sue you. In this case, I think Mr. Hanks is well within his rights to say, you did me wrong. Was there any effort by Clark County at all to set this right at any point? Or are they just going to defend this even today, 3 years later?
That's a great question because this case is about the principle of right and wrong and treating people respectfully. And when Robert's rights were violated, he didn't run to a lawyer and file a lawsuit right away. He went to the county sheriff's administration and he asked them to address this. And instead of addressing it, they just said, no, we think it's totally appropriate that this is what was done, and we're not going to take any corrective action. Too bad. And so the question is, why are we at where we're at now? And it's, really the county commissioners need to address this case, because once a case goes into court, it's county commissioners who decide whether or not they're going to defend the case any further or
spend
if
a lot of money
or go to trial.
Yep.
Yeah. And so really the question should be directed to the county commissioners from their constituency. You've already got a federal ruling on this. Why
other thing,
just admitting
Angus,
what you did
the
wrong?
other thing that bothers me about this, when you told me they get a call that a woman is being beaten, which could mean she's on her way to being dead, and they pull up in front of the address and sit there for 15 minutes before they go in, thinking, well, maybe he's still beating on her back there. If the neighbor was right, it turns out he was completely wrong. But if they sat out there for 15 minutes, that sounds like it needs to be addressed in saying, when you get a call that a woman may be in the middle of being beaten badly by somebody, you go in and you stop the beater. Except they didn't do that. Did they have any answer for that?
Well, the reality of the situation, Lars, is that if the law enforcement really believes and really has a reason to believe that there's some kind of heinous crime going on, they're not going to wait 15 minutes. The fact that they waited 15 minutes shows that this wasn't about the 911 call. This wasn't about the alleged acts in the home. This was about, this guy's a veteran. Robert Hanks is a veteran, and we need to be really aggressive with him. And again, they've admitted that they were more aggressive with him because he was a veteran.
And they're defending it, saying that is a perfectly appropriate policy. Angus, I can remember in the late 70s, early 80s, when there was kind of a meme, veterans are crazy. I mean, there were movies, there were TV shows, there was a lot, and veterans pushed back rightfully and said, hey, you can't run around just saying every veteran is some, nut who's ready to go off. Are we going back to that?
Unfortunately, this is not the first case where I've seen that sentiment expressed by law enforcement that they view veterans as more dangerous, more violent, and more of a threat. And, I spent a lot of time in the Marine Corps, and the Marines that I served with are by far the most civic-minded, professional individuals I've ever come across in my life. And on average, when law enforcement interacts with a veteran, they should know and assume that they're dealing with somebody who understands rules and etiquette and procedure and cares about this country. And they should treat them with a little bit of respect instead of viewing them as a violent criminal. It's totally
I couldn't agree with you more. Angus, thanks for your service in uniform. Thanks to Mr. Hanks. I'm glad we got a chance to tell this story. Nobody else seems to be covering this, but it's in federal court, and a judge says the federal civil rights lawsuit of Robert Hanks against Clark County, even though they tried to make it go away, is going to go forward. Angus, thank you very much. What if you could help turn back the clock and help your dog play like a puppy again, no matter their age? It's Lars, and it sure works for Sir Winston Churchill, my Bernese Mountain Dog. That's why Dr. Marty developed Nature's Blend, because your dog needs a diet full of real cuts of meat, similar to what they'd eat in the wild. Dogs go bonkers for Nature's Blend. When given the choice between Nature's Blend and the giant online retailer's #1 bestseller in dry dog food, a study shows 29 out of 30 dogs choose Nature's Blend first. Tori from Tulsa says, my fur baby is so eager to eat it. Other dog foods I've tried gave my sweet boy issues with allergies. They all went away with Dr. Marty's and Nature's Blend. Give your dog a food they'll love and help support their youthful energy, healthy skin, easy digestion, and a happy full life. For a limited time, claim 54% off Nature's Blend and get a free pack of premium dog treats from Dr. Marty Pets. Go to drmartypets.com/pets or text PETS to 511-511. That's text PETS to 511-511. Study available on request, message, and data rates apply. We'll be back in just a moment. I'll get to your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll get back to your phone calls and emails in just a moment. But there is on Congress a limitation called the Hyde Amendment. And basically what the Hyde Amendment says, you can't spend federal money on abortions, except it appears that the Biden administration is trying to get around the Hyde Amendment, and they want to provide abortions to people who are serving in uniform right now. Now, Ryan Walker knows all about that. He's the acting executive director of Heritage Action for America. Ryan, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Would you mind explaining to my audience what's going on right now? It's holding up a lot of promotions that are supposed to happen because there are members of Congress who I think correctly are saying that we should not change the rule on funding abortions for those in the military. And now I guess to some extent they're even talking about funding abortions and travel and time off and everything else to try to have the military fund abortions. Does that run up against the Hyde Amendment?
It does. It's so the Biden administration issued a memo in October of last year that went into effect in February of this year. That memo gives service members and their families paid time off and subsidized travel to receive abortions. This is a blatant violation of statute that governs the DoD and their ability or ability to provide these paid time off subsidies for individuals. And rightfully so, as you mentioned, Senator Tuberville from Alabama is standing up and is holding nominations for promotion in the DoD to receive an answer from the Department of Defense on this question, and ultimately to get them to rescind the memo, which we all believe is illegal and a blatant violation of U.S. law.
See, I think that Senator Tuberville is absolutely right about this, and it amazes me that the DOD has just dug in its heels. But here's the thing I'm trying to wrap my head around. The federal government can only spend money if it's appropriated, and it has to be appropriated by the U.S. Congress. It's basically passing a law saying you may spend such and such $1 billion on this, that, or the other thing. And then that appropriations bill goes to the president. He signs it. Where does Joe Biden at the White House get any inkling that he can simply sit down, write a memo, and say, here, pay for this stuff, especially when it's in violation of the Hyde Amendment? How is the White House? Are they just saying we're going to do this till we get called out on it, as they're being called out now?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think that's exactly their operating agenda and how they think and enact policies. We've seen this on other issues like student loan forgiveness and any of the other regulations this administration is putting out. Their tact or tactic in implementing this stuff is to just try it. Simply ignore the law, ignore congressional intent, and wait for a court challenge to overturn what they're doing. And in the meantime, they get the federal government, to employ their radical agenda on the American people. And the court system, as we all know, is delayed and takes time for these debates and arguments to come in front of a judge and for a ruling to be issued. And so the Biden administration is taking advantage of the American people, the justice system, and Congress in implementing blatantly illegal actions that they know will be overturned.
Well, and here's the other part I want people to understand. I know they're doing this to some extent in response to the Dobbs decision from last year, where the Supreme Court said that Roe v. Wade is not part of the Constitution. There is no constitutional right to abortion, and we're going to leave it up to the states. So that's relevant because I guess the argument is being made by the military. We need to be able to provide travel and expenses and I guess even the cost of the abortion to send a young service member who happens to serve in a conservative state, Mississippi, Texas, wherever. They have to be able to fly to some friendly blue state where they can get the abortion they want if they can't obtain one in Texas. That's generally what the argument is, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. And it goes against these state laws, as you're mentioning. Most of these states where this is occurring have laws on the books that prevent this stuff in their own states. And so the DOD is sort of assisting these individuals to travel to another state in violation of the state law of where they are deployed currently.
And pay the travel and the expenses and what, up to 3 weeks off to do this?
That's right, and for family members. So these abortions are occurring now. We have seen data from the Department of Defense disclosing how many individuals have taken advantage of this new policy, and it's stunning. It is truly stunning.
Well, and the other piece of this, Ryan, I haven't been in the military, but when I talk to people who are, they say, you can't do anything, even get a sunburn that makes you, unavailable for the military duty you've signed up for. If a young lady gets pregnant, and then decides to wait in Texas, the general limit is about 6 or 7 weeks. It's till the fetal heartbeat can be heard. So say she's serving at a military base in Texas, and she says, well, I know I'm pregnant. That's going to make me, unavailable for military duty. I want to seek an abortion. And then she has to wait past the state limit to say, now I have to go somewhere else to get the abortion, because she could have got one in Texas within 6 weeks, which is when the majority of abortions happen. Even the CDC says 2/3 of all abortions are done by the 8-week mark of gestation. So, she has to have failed and got pregnant when she didn't intend to, decide to abort the child, which I don't agree with, but that's a separate issue, and then wait longer than what the state says is allowed, and then she gets 3 weeks of leave and paid travel. That sounds like a tremendously attractive proposition for the government to be funding attractive in the sense that if she had obtained an abortion in Texas at, say, 4 weeks or 5 weeks when most of them happen, but if I wait till 8 or 9 weeks, then I can go to my boss and say, I'd like 3 weeks off, and I'd like you to fly me back to where my family lives in a friendly blue state that has abortion anytime you want it.
That's right. And I would add to that it's the inherent message here is unsettling, that they would rather an individual go and receive an abortion and be ready to deploy again rather than care for the child. And I think we could get into discussions of how the DoD treats parents and accommodates for deployments, and especially of two-parent households who both serve. There are a number of measures that the DoD could take to actually care for and provide services for families and parents of military in the military. But this policy, there is a sort of a bad message that comes with this, that it is more convenient for the military for you to go and receive an abortion and be ready to deploy again.
Kill the kid, you'll be ready to get back into your military service, and that's what they're doing. It sounds like you're making the case that the military is acting under Joe Biden in an anti-family, anti-life way. Is that going too far in saying it that way?
Well, I just think that this is an example of how the administration thinks. They think of it through the political question, to your point earlier about the Dobbs decision and what is the debate happening in the country. And they are taking advantage of that debate to push their, I would say, a radical agenda on the American people. And it's purely political. And we're seeing the results of that now, where there are other policies that they could be looking at to better care and better provide for families and parents of children.
Well, keep up the fight, Ryan. Thanks very much for what you do at Heritage Action.
Thank you for having me.
You betcha. That's Ryan Walker, the acting executive director of the group called Heritage Action for America. When we get back, I'll get to your phone calls and emails at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@LarsLarson.com. And you're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I think I've told you before, I don't spend a lot of time on my history in radio. But I've been on the radio for about 48 years, and I got my first job at the ripe old age of 16, and I got it making $1.85 an hour. That was the federal minimum wage back there in 1975. And I got an experience that was interesting because, among other things that I had to learn, I had to get a federal license to be able to sign the transmitter logs and all the rest of that stuff that was required by the FCC. And among other things, there was something that was then called the EBS, the Emergency Broadcast System. It is now called the EAS, Emergency Alert System, because it's not just broadcast, it's not just radio. They're using social media and cell phones and a lot of other things to get the word out when there's a big emergency in a particular area. But one of the things that was drilled into my head was that back in those days, if you had the wire service machine, the teletype, and it had a notice on it that said an EBS test had to be performed at a certain time. Now, you're not going to hear me playing any EBS sounds. People do make that dumb mistake and put them on the radio. They're designed to be heard only when there is an emergency, and me talking about is not such an emergency. But one of the things that got drilled into me was that radio and the federal government had developed a system that even back then, without all the technology, to be able to alert people. I think that they anticipated that someday we might need to alert the whole country that there were nuclear weapons on the way from the evil empire, Russia. That's not as much of a big problem now. Now the evil empire is China. But the general manager that I worked for of the radio station when I was 16 said, if there's an EBS test, you do log it, you will log it, you will not fail to log it, and you will get that EBS test on the air in a timely fashion or else. I mean, that was really clear. Well, now the technology has changed, it's improved and all that, but AM radio, I mean, while my show is on a lot of FM radios and AM radios, and it's on streaming and podcasts and all the rest of that stuff, iHeart, Alexa, and the rest, AM radio is still the backbone of that system. And there's a reason for it. Well, now the U.S. Congress is finally going to act to try to save AM radio because AM radio is under attack. And I think there's politics involved in that, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And I think the car companies are participating in that. There are car makers that have decided that with all the other things that a brand spanking new car, if you can afford a new car, you've got an entertainment system in there that'll do navigation, it'll play MP3s, it'll play podcasts, it'll receive satellite radio. I'm not as crazy about satellite radio. It'll receive AM, FM, it'll play all kinds of different things anytime you want it. And then they want to do away with AM radio. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, the folks who make electric cars say, well, AM radio suffers from interference, which, as far as I'm concerned, the technology is there to make sure that AM radio is not interfered with. And if you're thinking, Lars, I haven't listened to AM radio in forever, I understand that. When I first got into radio, about 80 to 85% of the listening was done on AM, and only about 15 or 20% was on FM. Today, those numbers are almost exactly flipped, if not worse. An awful lot of listening is done on FM, or it's done by streaming in other ways. So why is AM radio still important? Because if you're in your car, if you're away from your home, or even if you're in your home, and there's an emergency, an earthquake, a tornado, a hurricane, a military emergency, any of that, and you lose AM radio, you're probably going to lose communication. And you say, no, I've got my cell phone right here. That's assuming the cell towers are still operating, and there are technological problems and others that take down the cell towers. And you say, but I've always got streaming. I can get anything I need off the internet. Well, that's assuming you have internet. And internet is dependent in many cases, for most people, it's dependent on that cable that comes into your home, a physical wire that comes into your home, or a fiber out at the street that supplies your internet. If the internet goes down, if the cell towers go down, you've still got AM radio. And most AM radio stations in America were equipped with emergency generators and all kinds of things back in the 50s to make sure that, and the big problem they were concerned about was the Cold War, nuclear weapons, and the evil empire. Well, guess what's happened now? The car makers have decided, some of them have said, we want to do away with AM radio altogether. Now, you got a chip on that entertainment system in your car. If you're driving a newer car, that chip can do just about anything you want. As I said, play MP3s, receive satellite radio, do podcasts and downloads, and the whole 9 yards. Adding AM radio or keeping AM radio on that chip is no big deal. But now the Congress is actually acting because they see the danger. Now, let me tell you about the political end of this. There's both the Congress, Senate committee has now passed the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act to make sure that AM radio stays in every single brand new car. There are people who'd like to do away with AM radio, and let me tell you something unique about AM radio. AM radio is where you find most talk radio in America. And talk radio in America is unique. I don't know of another country that has anything like what we have in talk radio. And I can tell you that when I got into radio in 1975, so 48 years ago, there were very few talk shows in America. Very few. They had about 100 stations that were all talk radio stations. 100 out of about 12,000 radio stations, only 100 were talk radio stations. You say, no, Lars, talk radio is everywhere. Yes, it is. It is the single biggest format in radio today. But it wasn't up to about 1988. Then they got rid of the fairness doctrine, which wasn't fair at all. And they said, we're going to have talk radio. And the number of stations that carried all talk radio and allowed conservatives to communicate. There is liberal talk radio. It hasn't succeeded very well at all, but conservative talk radio is the single biggest format in radio in America. And why? Because it's the one place you can find a conservative point of view. Try to find a conservative point of view in your local Daily Dead fish wrapper, the newspaper, if you still have a newspaper. Try to find a conservative point of view on television, broadcast television, or even on cable television. Heck, conservative points of view have even gone away from Fox News. And good luck finding a conservative point of view on CNN or MSNBC or ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS. You're not going to find it. So the liberals would love to do away with AM radio because they figure if we do away with the AM radios in cars, which is where many people listen, then we're going to do away with AM radio. And if we do away with AM radio, we do away with talk radio. And then what will happen is everybody will hear one point of view. You'll hear the liberal, progressive, and these days Marxist point of view that is so present in America. And the one reliable place you can still hear a conservative point of view is on talk radio. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.